She was lying on a hospital bed, dying, while her husband stood outside holding divorce papers, and his mistress held his arm like a trophy. But here's what Cole Maddox didn't know. The papers he'd just signed? They weren't liability waivers. They were parental refusal forms. And the doctor who saved his wife's life? He just became the legal guardian of all three of Cole's newborn children. The look on Cole's face when he found out? Priceless. But the look on Verena's face? That was pure terror, because the lie she built was about to collapse, and it was going to bury them both. You see, Verena Lowe didn't just sleep with Harper's husband. She hacked into his medical records, faked his fertility results, and convinced him his own babies weren't his. She destroyed a marriage with a spreadsheet and a stolen password. But what nobody expected, the man who walked down that hospital hallway at the worst possible moment, the one person whose face made Cole go pale. Because the secrets didn't stop with Verena. They went deeper, darker, and all the way back 15 years to a father who vanished without a goodbye and came back wanting something no mother should ever have to give. This is a story about what happens when the people who were supposed to protect you become the ones you need protection from, and how one woman found the courage to stop being small for people who never deserved her. If you've ever had to fight for something that should have been yours all along, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because the moment Harper walks into that boardroom will give you chills. And if this hits home, leave a comment telling me what you would have done. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one.
If I was the quiet one, trying to hold things together, then Cole Maddox was the hurricane trying to tear it all down. He wasn't always like that, you know. Not when we first met. But sometimes, honey, power doesn't change people. It just shows you who they really were all along. And underneath that expensive suit, Cole was not a kind man. He grew up in one of those wealthy New England towns where what people thought of you was more important than doing the right thing. His father, a cold man who ran a hedge fund, taught him that feelings were a sign of weakness. So Cole learned young how to be charming, how to get what he wanted, and how to win by stepping on people without them ever knowing. By the time he got to Manhattan, he was a master at it. You know, your grandfather, Cole, was brilliant at keeping up appearances while everything underneath was just falling apart. I never saw the cracks, not until the whole thing came crashing down. He didn't just drift away when he became successful, honey. He took our life apart intentionally, piece by piece. Love turned into criticism, then into silence, and finally into a coldness he tried to pass off as logic. He'd say his stress was my fault, that I didn't fit into his new world, that I wanted a family he wasn't sure he could provide. But none of that held a candle to Verena Lowe. She walked into his life with a smile so perfect it looked like it came from a factory. She was his junior analyst, always there with a spreadsheet or a cup of coffee. But beneath that quiet exterior was a different kind of ambition. Verena didn't want a promotion. She wanted a life built from the wreckage of mine, and she targeted Cole the way a wolf stalks the one it knows it can take down, quietly, with absolute focus. I remember the first time we met. She gave me this handshake that was polite but had no warmth, and her eyes scanned my old second-hand sweater with this flicker of disdain. "You must be Harper," she said. "Cole mentions you sometimes." I didn't get it then, but she'd already found a way into his private health records. She knew the doctors had told him his chances of having children were almost zero. She knew just how to turn that fact into a weapon. And she didn't hesitate. Night after night, she'd stay late, giving him sympathy, telling him he was right, and eventually giving him herself. She planted the idea in his head. "Triplets, Cole, with your medical history, You should really think about what that implies. And he listened, because his ego was always so much hungrier than his heart. From that day on, Verena orchestrated everything. She created a fake copy of his medical file. She convinced him to push me away. She was the poor victim when he felt guilty, his trusted friend when he was insecure, and his lover when he felt powerful. By my third trimester, her influence was behind every cruel thing he said. And there she was, in that hospital waiting room, standing next to him, her hand on his arm, like she had every right. When the nurse asked, "Are you the father?" Verena just had this little smirk, so certain of his answer. But what they didn't know, what neither of them could have guessed, was that fate was about to step in. A reckoning was coming, one that started with a signature on a form, one that grew with a falsified report, and one that would bring their whole dishonest world down around them. Because in that very moment, someone they never expected walked down the hall. And the look on his face said it all. Their lies had finally found their way to the one person they shouldn't have. I was told later that the hallway outside my delivery room went completely silent, the kind of heavy quiet you feel just before a storm breaks. Nurses were trying to look busy, but couldn't stop staring at my door. Everyone knew something terrible was happening. Cole Maddox was there, standing rigid, clutching divorce papers like they were some kind of award he'd won for destroying our family. And Verena was hovering right beside him, her fingers brushing his sleeve every few seconds, staking a claim on him that wasn't hers to make. Looking back, every move was an act, the concerned look, the soft voice, the way she watched him with this phony adoration. She was already playing the part of the new woman in his life before I had even given birth. And then the nurse asked that simple question, "Sir, are you the father?" It was supposed to be routine, just for the paperwork. But in that room, it felt like a bombshell. Cole tensed up, looking over at Verena, who just smiled that little confident smile, as if she was expecting him to deny you all right then and there. But that wasn't what made the air go still. It was the clipboard in the nurse's hand. The chart lists a Dr. Rowan Hale as the emergency guardian and legal signatory for all three of the infants. We just need to confirm everything for the long-term records. I heard Cole's face went pale. "What did you say?" His voice was thin and cracked, not like him at all. Verena immediately stepped in. "That must be a mistake. Dr. Hale? Why would he sign? Cole is their father. His name belongs on those forms." The nurse just frowned. "Sir, you signed a pre-delivery refusal form. In a medical emergency, it gives the hospital the right to appoint the next available guardian." Cole looked completely lost, probably thinking of the papers Verena had rushed him into signing hours before, telling him they were just liability waivers. Verena, though, wasn't confused. She was panicking. Harper didn't ask him to do that, she insisted. She hardly knows Dr. Hale. A little buzz went through the hall. Everyone knew Rowan Hale, the brilliant, unshakable doctor you prayed for when things went wrong. His name being on that paper meant my life had been in real danger. Then, the door at the end of the hall opened. Rowan walked out, tall and steady, still in his scrubs, looking like he'd been through a battle to keep me alive. His hair was a mess, his jaw was tight, and his eyes, usually so kind, were filled with a quiet fire. He walked right past everyone and stopped in front of Cole. "You weren't here," Rowan said, and his calm voice cut deeper than any shout could have. "She was dying. The babies were crashing. Someone had to step up." Cole just scoffed, trying to get his pride back. "You had no right." Rowan moved a little closer, his voice low. "And you had no interest. You left her. You left them." A wave of shock just rolled through the little crowd. I heard people started whispering, raising their phones. Someone was recording it all. For the very first time, Cole looked like he was losing control of his perfect reputation. Rowan wasn't finished. Harper survived because she fought. Your children survived because this hospital fought. And you, he never got to finish that sentence. An alarm suddenly screamed from inside my room. My heart rate was plummeting. Cole spun around, but Rowan was already running. The second they both crossed that doorway, everything they thought they knew was about to fall to pieces. For me, the world was fading in and out, like being pulled under by a gentle tide. Voices were a distant hum, lights were blurry, and each breath was a painful effort. I could feel people moving around me, the click of instruments, the sound of shoes rushing on the floor. I knew things were bad long before they said anything. There was a crushing weight on my chest, and my arms and legs started to feel numb, and in that haze, I remembered Cole's voice, so cold and final, walking away from me at the moment I needed him most. That, honey, is when my spirit just gave out. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet little break that would stay with me for a long time. A single tear slid down my cheek, and in all that chaos, no one even noticed. It wasn't from the physical pain. It was the ache you feel when your last little bit of hope is gone, and there's just a hollow space left inside you. "She's losing pressure," a nurse called out. "We need to stabilize her now." I wanted to say something, to tell them I was okay, that I just couldn't leave my babies behind, but I couldn't speak. My mind just started drifting away to old memories. My own mother tucking me in bed, a younger me promising myself I would be the best mom. The day I saw that positive pregnancy test, the miracle I never thought would happen, and a memory of Cole smiling at me, a long, long time ago, before all his ambition and secrets changed him. Then a darker thought pushed through, the sound of Cole whispering, "They're not mine," while I lay there helpless. Those words felt like a fist closing around my heart. My breathing stopped. The monitors shrieked. "She's crashing." A mask was put over my face. Gentle hands held my head. Someone called for medicine. Someone else yelled for Rowan. And through my blurry eyes, I saw him, Rowan Hale, appearing at my side, looking like a storm just barely held in check. His eyes scanned everything, calm and in control. "Harper, stay with me," he said, leaning in. His voice was so steady, so grounding. "You're okay. You're safe. I've got you." It had been such a long time since anyone had said those words to me. Another tear slipped out. "Rowan, BP is dropping fast." "Get me a second line," he commanded. "We're not losing her. Not today." His hand found mine and he squeezed it, so firm and certain, as if he could hold me to this world all by himself. "Think of your babies," Rowan said, his voice much softer. "They need you. You hear me? They need their mom." My heart fluttered, stopped for a terrifying second, and then beat again, faint but there. I saw the relief wash over Rowan's face. "That's it. Fight. Don't you give up on me now." My vision started to dim, and all the colors faded to gray. It's funny the things you remember when your world falls apart. For me, it was how all the sounds got stretched out and weird, like my mind was a machine slowly shutting down. Just as everything was about to go black, I heard a man's voice, just seething with anger, shouting, "What do you mean her babies are under another man's name?" And then, Verina's, her voice shaking with fear, replying, "They're saying Rowan Hale signed everything." My heart just dropped. Then nothing. For hours I was lost in this hazy fog, where voices and lights were just blurs. I have no idea how much time passed before I woke up to the steady beeping of a machine. My breathing was even again, and the room was dim and cool on my skin, and I saw I wasn't by myself. Rowan Hale was sitting there, hunched over with his elbows on his knees, looking absolutely exhausted. His scrubs were a mess, and his hair was all over the place, like he'd been running his hands through it all night. But when he looked up at me, his eyes had this kindness in them that I couldn't quite place. "You gave us a real scare," he said, his voice so gentle. I tried to talk, but my throat felt like sandpaper. He gave me some water, holding the cup with a tenderness I hadn't felt in ages. My first words were shaky. "My babies, are they okay?" "They're little fighters," he told me. "Much stronger than we thought. They're stable." The relief was so strong, it made me cry, but it didn't last. A shadow of pain crossed Rowan's face, a look he tried to conceal. "Harper," he began, "there's something we have to discuss." I felt that familiar knot of dread in my stomach. What was it? What did I hear right before I fainted? He let out a long breath. "The hospital needed a legal guardian on file right away. Cole wasn't here, and you were unconscious. It's just protocol for someone to sign." "And that was you?" I whispered. "As the doctor on duty, yes, I signed." He added softly, "So for now, the babies have the last name Hale." I couldn't breathe. My children legally tied to a man I hardly knew. It felt like a dream. "But that's not the biggest problem," Rowan said, his voice low. "Cole's fertility records. They were tampered with." I just stared. "Tampered with? What are you talking about?" Rowan got up and grabbed a file. He moved, slowly, deliberately. Someone went into his medical chart and changed things. Lab results, diagnoses, everything was faked. He looked right at me. "Cole is not infertile. He never was." The room seemed to spin. "But he had papers," I stammered. "He showed them to me. He told me he couldn't—" "He thought they were real," Rowan explained. "But someone with access to his medical profile knew exactly how to change his records." The truth of it hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Verena. The name felt like ice in my veins. Rowan kept going. "And there's something else. When you collapsed, the NICU ran extra genetic tests to check parentage for a blood match." My heart started hammering. "And?" He waited a second too long, and my stomach plummeted. "The triplets' DNA is a 99% match to Cole's. Biologically, they are his children." My breath caught in my throat. All those months of being called a liar, the doubt, the divorce papers he'd thrown at me, it was all based on a lie designed to ruin me. "But why?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Why would anyone do that?" Rowan's jaw was tight. "There's something you should know about Verena Lowe. She wasn't just working with Cole. She was in your nursing program years ago." My eyes went wide as a memory surfaced. Verena's cold handshake, that little smirk she always had, the way she'd looked at me. "She tried to ruin you back then, too," Rowan said. "Messed with your scholarship files, your recommendations. She has a history of coming after you." It felt like my pulse was pounding in my ears. This wasn't bad luck. It was a setup from the very beginning. Before I could even process it all, there was a knock at my door. A nurse stuck her head in, looking panicked. "Dr. Hale, we have a situation in the NICU. Someone's trying to get into the triplets ward." Rowan's face turned to stone. "Who is it?" he asked. The nurse looked terrified. "It's Cole and Verena." A chill went through me. I realized then that this nightmare wasn't ending. It was just getting started. That next morning, though, felt like a whole new chapter. I was sitting up in bed, and the fear, the trembling, it was gone. Something in me had snapped into place. Maybe it was hearing the truth, or maybe it was almost dying. Or maybe, honey, I just finally understood I'd spent years making myself small for a man who didn't deserve it. The woman who woke up that day was not the same one who'd cried for him to stay. There was a soft knock. It was Nurse Priya, holding a small mirror on wheels. "You asked me for this," she said kindly. "Are you ready?" "I am," I whispered. "I have to see." She set the mirror up. I took a deep breath, expecting to see a ghost, pale, exhausted, with dark circles. But when I looked, I was stunned. I didn't look broken. I looked fiercely alive. There was color in my cheeks. My messy hair actually framed my face nicely. And my eyes, they weren't tired anymore. They were clear, determined. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I saw my own mother's fire looking back at me. "Let's get you cleaned up," Priya offered. And we did. She braided my hair, straightened my gown, and washed the tear stains off my face. It wasn't about looking pretty. It was about putting myself back together, one small act at a time. When Rowan came in later, he actually stopped in the doorway. "You look—" He trailed off, but I saw it in his eyes. "Stronger." I gave him a little smile. "I feel like I'm finally awake." He pulled up a chair, his expression turning serious. "We've secured the NICU. Cole and Verena can't get to the babies again." The flicker of fear I felt was gone in an instant. "Good," I said. "I'm through with them running my life." He watched me for a second. "You sound different." "I am different." I looked toward the window at the morning sun. For so long, I thought my job was to save my marriage, to be what he wanted. But that was never my place. I don't belong in his shadow, or anyone else's. Rowan's expression softened. "You never did." I kept going, my voice getting stronger. "When I leave here, I'm getting a lawyer. I want DNA tests, all the proof of those fake records, everything. I am done being pushed around. If he wants a fight, I'll give him one. Only this time, I know what I'm fighting for." Rowan nodded, a look of pure admiration on his face. "I'll do whatever I can to help." But I shook my head. "No, this is something I have to do for myself." Even so, he didn't quite leave it at that. He passed me a sealed envelope. "What is this?" "You're going to need it," was all he said. Inside, I found a card for one of the most powerful family law firms in Manhattan. The kind of place I could never afford. Just the name on it felt like armor. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Rowan, I can't pay for—" "You can," he cut me off, "because the retainer is already taken care of." I was speechless. I just stared at him. "Why? Why are you doing all of this for me?" He looked away for a second, his jaw tight. There was something in his eyes, something he wasn't saying. "Because someone should have been looking out for you a long time ago, and because you deserve a life where you aren't always fighting just to breathe." My heart skipped a beat. Before I could find my voice, I heard his, cold and sharp, coming down the hall. "Cole." He was here again, and then I heard hers, Verena's. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of that company had never been so quiet. You could see the whole Manhattan skyline from the windows, which cast this cold light on the big glass table. It should have been just another Tuesday morning, with people shuffling papers and talking numbers. Instead, the room was packed, and you could feel the tension in the air. It was because I had arrived, and I was there to finish what he started. I didn't go in by myself. Rowan Hale was right there with me, and we had two lawyers who looked like they'd never lost a case in their lives. I wasn't wearing a hospital gown this time. I had on this beautiful dark green dress that made my hair look like fire, and I stood up straight, with my head held high. I was not the fragile woman he thought he'd gotten rid of. I was the mother of his 3 babies. I was the woman he never imagined would fight back. Cole was at the other end of the table, and you could just see his smug confidence starting to crumble. Verena stood right next to him, in her power blazer, trying to look like she belonged there. But her eyes kept darting around the room. She looked like a cornered animal. "All right, let's just get on with it," Cole said, trying to sound like he was in charge. "You have no right to come into my company." Rowan just smiled a little. "Actually, we do. We were invited." And with that, he slid a file across the table. "By your board of directors." You could hear people gasp all around the room. The oldest woman on the board, with this severe gray hair, leaned forward. "Mr. Maddox, your wife, your legal wife, has brought some very disturbing claims to our attention about falsified medical records and emotional distress." Cole's face turned beet red. "That's ridiculous. She's making it all up. That's enough," I said. "You know, it's funny. I remember my voice didn't even shake. It was just calm." I slid a pile of papers toward him. "These are the real fertility results," I told them. Then I put another folder on top. "And this is the proof of who changed them." Verena went pale. The lawyers had everything blown up on screens, login times, IP addresses, all of it pointing right at her. "No," she whispered. "That can't be. I didn't—" Rowan stepped toward her, his eyes just drilling into her. "You broke into a secure medical system with a stolen password. You faked the results. You pushed Cole to ruin his marriage, then tried to get into the NICU." The whole room just exploded. Cole looked like he'd been punched. "You did this?" She just spat at him. "You were supposed to pick me. You always chose her, even when you didn't know it. I just had to show you." "That wasn't the truth," I said, my voice low. "That was just obsession." Suddenly, she lunged, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You don't deserve him. He's mine." That's when security came in, the ones Rowan had called earlier. Verena started screaming as they grabbed her. Cole just stood there, frozen. As they pulled her out, she was still yelling, "It's not over! You'll all regret this!" The room went silent. Cole looked around, a sort of panic in his eyes. "You can't believe her. She's just trying to destroy me." But I was already opening the last folder, the one that held the final piece of the puzzle. It had the DNA results he'd screamed were impossible. "You were their father, Cole," I told him gently, "and you left your own children." The entire board just froze. I could practically feel his world shaking. That's when Rowan put a hand on my shoulder. "Harper," he said softly, "you've done what you needed to do." But I wasn't finished. I stepped up, looking right at Cole, my voice finally trembling a little, but with strength. "This is just the beginning." In that exact moment, the chairman called for a vote to decide Cole's future. It happened so fast, but the silence was deafening. I watched as the people who once called him a genius raised their hands, one after another, to remove him as CEO. There was no hesitation, no pity. It was just the quiet, chilling sound of a king losing his crown. I saw Cole swallow hard, trying to process it. "You can't. I built this place." The chairwoman simply closed her folder. "And you almost tore it down." She went on, "Reckless choices, ethical failures, and neglect that hurt your own family. We can't trust this company to a man who puts his ego first." I just stood there watching. I didn't feel triumphant or happy. I just felt still, like a soldier on a battlefield after the noise stops. He turned to me then, his eyes wild with rage. "This is your fault. You turned them all against me." "No," I answered softly. "You managed that all by yourself." He looked around the room, so desperate for an ally, for just one friendly face. But Verena was gone. His friends wouldn't even meet his eye. He had absolutely no one left. When security came for him, he took a step back. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my company." But the fight had gone out of him. They took his arms, and he didn't resist. He just looked deflated. like the weight of it all was finally too much for him to carry. Right before he left, he looked back at me. His eyes were full of a fear I recognized, because I'd once felt it too. But I knew I'd never feel it again. When he was gone, it was like everyone in the room could breathe again. The board members gave me these quiet little nods. It wasn't pity, it was respect. Rowan came closer, his voice just for me. "It's finally over, Harper." But I just shook my head. No, not quite. He looked at me, confused. "What's left?" I lifted my chin. My children need to be protected. I need full custody. And Cole, well, he's going to do something crazy when this all sinks in. Rowan nodded, understanding completely. Then we get ready. When we walked out, the lobby was a madhouse of reporters. Cameras were flashing everywhere, people shouting questions. The story was already breaking all over the city about the disgraced CEO. I instinctively raised a hand, but Rowan stepped right in front of me, using his body to shield me from it all. "It's all right," he murmured. "I've got you." And his presence, so solid and calm, was everything. For the first time in forever, I realized I wasn't going through this by myself. The winter air was biting outside, but I felt this warmth spreading through me. A heavy weight was finally gone. I had walked through hell and come out the other side. But one question still bothered me. "Do you think he'll just go away?" I asked Rowan. He let out a long breath. "People like Cole don't just go away. They fight back." I swallowed, feeling a new kind of chill as the snow started to fall. "Then I have to be ready." Rowan looked at me, his gaze serious. "You won today, and you'll win whatever comes next. I promise." Just as I was about to say something, his phone buzzed. He glanced down, and his face immediately darkened. "What is it?" I asked, my heart starting to pound. Rowan looked up, his voice tight. "It's the hospital." The hallways there felt so much colder that night. I remember thinking the walls themselves knew something was wrong. My heart was hammering as I tried to keep up with Rowan, our footsteps echoing on the slick floors. My hands were clammy, and my throat was tight. I'd faced so much, but nothing scared me like the thought of those 3 tiny incubators being in danger. "What happened?" I managed to ask. "They had an unauthorized person try to get into the NICU," Rowan said, his voice sharp. "They ran when the staff saw them." My stomach just plummeted. "They got inside?" "No," Rowan said, "but they were close." When we got to the NICU, I saw security guards standing by the doors, looking tense. One of them spoke to Rowan. "Dr. Hale, we checked the security tapes," he said. The person had a visitor badge, but it wasn't a new one. "How did they get it?" I whispered. The guard paused. "We're looking into it, but there's something else." He looked at me. "Ma'am, the badge was in your name." I felt my legs go weak. "Mine?" "But I haven't been out of the maternity wing. I never requested a badge." Rowan's jaw was set. "Someone's using her identity." A cold panic started to creep up my spine. Who would do that? Cole was angry, but would he be that reckless? And I knew Verena was already with the police. Then who? Rowan just put a hand on my arm. "Come on, let's go see the babies." The moment we walked in, I heard that steady beeping from the monitors. That warm, dim room always felt like a sanctuary to me. I rushed over to the incubators where my 3 little ones were sleeping, so tiny and perfect. Noah, Grace, and Oliver. My whole world. I touched the glass, whispering, "Mommy's here." "They're fine," Rowan said quietly from behind me. Nothing was touched. I let out a shaky breath, but the relief was paper thin. "Someone is after them," I said, my voice trembling. "But why? What could they possibly want?" Rowan didn't answer right away. He waited until the nurse had given us some privacy. He turned to me then, and he had a look on his face I'd never seen before, so serious. "There's another possibility," he said, very slowly, "that Cole has nothing to do with this." I frowned. Who else could it be? He put his hands in his pockets, and I could tell he was thinking hard about what to say next. The badge wasn't the only strange thing. The intruder didn't go for the triplets first. They went to a supply cabinet. "A cabinet?" I repeated, confused. "Why?" "Because," Rowan said, meeting my eyes, "that's where they keep the blood typing charts. Someone wasn't trying to hurt them. They were trying to confirm their DNA." And I realized the blood drained from my face. Why would anyone want that? Rowan's silence was louder than any answer. Then a nurse rushed into the NICU, breathless. "Dr. Hale, you need to see this." She held out a tablet. Security had enhanced the footage. The intruder's face was partially obscured by a hood, but not enough. Harper froze. She knew that face, a face she hadn't seen in almost 15 years, her estranged father, the man who abandoned her. And now he was trying to reach her children. For a long moment, Harper couldn't breathe. The image on the tablet, grainy, slightly distorted, but unmistakably him, hollowed out her chest. That face, aged but familiar, yanked her backward through years she had buried on purpose. Her father, Patrick Sullivan, the man who vanished without a goodbye, the man who left her and her mother drowning in overdue bills and broken promises, the man she hadn't spoken to since she was 13. "What is he doing here?" Harper whispered. "Why now?" Rowan gently took the tablet from her trembling hands. "We don't know yet, but security has flagged his visitor ID." It was Gishug using stolen credentials. Her stomach churned. All the night she spent crying alone after he abandoned them came flooding back. The months of eviction notices, her mother working triples to keep them afloat, the crushing guilt she carried when her mother became sick. Harper had learned early that the people meant to protect you were sometimes the first to walk away. She hadn't expected him to return. She definitely hadn't expected him to return like this. Rowan stepped closer. "Harper, when was the last time you saw him?" 15 years ago, she whispered. "He walked out, didn't call, didn't send money, didn't even show up when Mom got sick. I thought he was dead." Her voice cracked on the last word. Rowan's expression softened. "Maybe he's desperate. Maybe something happened." Harper shook her head. "He was never desperate enough to come home. Not for me, not for her." She stared at the newborns in their incubators, the tiny lives she would die to protect, and the thought of her father, the man who couldn't even protect his own child trying to access them, made her skin crawl. The NICU nurse lingered nearby, hesitant. "There's more. We pulled hospital records from admissions earlier this morning. Someone under your father's name requested a consultation with genetic specialists." Harper's eyes widened. "Genetics? Why?" Rowan exchanged a look with the nurse, a heavy one. "Harper, there's a chance your father may be sick." Harper's breath faltered. "Sick?" "Certain genetic disorders require close biological relatives for treatment," Rowan explained carefully. "Sometimes grandchildren." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. "No," she whispered. "He doesn't get to walk back into my life and demand anything. He doesn't get to use my kids as solutions." Rowan placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to make any decisions right now, but you need to know the truth before he tries to reach you again." Harper swallowed hard. Her pulse thundered. She felt the old wounds opening, wounds she thought she'd sealed long ago. "But why steal a badge?" she murmured. "Why, sneak around instead of talking to me?" The nurse lowered her voice. "Because the hospital declined his request. He wasn't authorized to learn anything about you or the babies. He tried to force access. Harper felt a disturbing mix of anger and dread twist inside her. Her father had always been unpredictable, charming when he wanted something, cruel when he didn't get it. But this was different. This was deliberate, calculated. Rowan hesitated before speaking again. There's one more thing you should hear. The security team found something dropped near the NICU entrance. He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded piece of paper. Harper unfolded it slowly, her breath quickening as she recognized the handwriting, jagged, messy, painfully familiar. It read, "Harper, I need your children. Don't make me do this the hard way." Her hands shook. The room spun. Rowan grabbed the paper before it slipped from her fingers. Her father wasn't here for reconciliation. He was here for possession. Before Rowan could speak, another alarm blared across the floor, a NICU alert that made Harper's blood turn to ice. A nurse burst into the hall. "Dr. Hale, one of the baby's monitors just spiked. We need you now." Harper's heart stopped, and when she ran into the NICU, she realized the nightmare wasn't over. It was escalating. The NICU was pulsing with urgency the moment Harper rushed inside. Alarms flashed overhead, casting red light across the room, like a warning from the universe itself. Nurses moved quickly, but with measured precision, surrounding the smallest of Harper's babies, Oliver, her most fragile child. His monitor had spiked, oxygen levels dipping just enough to trigger panic. Harper pressed a hand to her chest, trying to breathe. "What's happening?" A nurse checked the ventilator connections. "His vitals are stabilizing, but someone tampered with the incubator settings. The temperature was shifted." Harper froze. Shifted? On purpose? "It wasn't a system glitch," the nurse said grimly. "Someone did this manually." Her vision blurred as horror washed over her. First her father trying to sneak in, now this. Someone willing to risk a newborn's life. Then Rowan stormed into the NICU with the intensity of a man ready for war. He went straight to Oliver's side, assessing the charts, adjusting the settings, and barking orders with practiced calm. "Get me a full diagnostic read. I want every change time-stamped," he said, "and the lock every access point. No one gets within 10 feet of these babies without triple verification." His presence steadied the room, and for a moment Harper felt the world stop shaking. But when Rowan finally turned toward her, she saw something new in his eyes, something sharp and controlled only by force. "Harper," he said quietly, "this wasn't your father." She swallowed. "How do you know?" Rowan lifted a small object sealed in a plastic evidence bag, a security badge, a badge that didn't belong to her father. A badge that didn't belong to Cole either. "This was found under the incubator," Rowan said. "It's a duplicate access card used by hospital staff." Harper's stomach tightened. "Whose is it?" Rowan hesitated just long enough to make her knees weaken. "It belongs to a night shift technician, one who clocked out early tonight." Harper frowned. "But why would he?" "Because someone paid him," Rowan said flatly, "and we need to know who." Before she could answer, the NICU doors burst open, and a security supervisor hurried in. "Dr. Hale, we've detained the technician," he said. "He claims he didn't intend to harm anyone, just do a job." Harper's pulse spiked. "What job?" The supervisor looked from Harper to Rowan, unsure how much to reveal. Rowan nodded for him to continue. "He said a woman contacted him, offered cash to trigger a mild scare so the mother would be distracted long enough for someone else to speak to the infants. Said it was a family matter." Harper felt ice slide down her spine. "A woman?" Rowan stiffened. "Describe her." He said she was in her 30s, tall, dark red hair, expensive coat. Harper shook her head. "No, that can't be. Verena is already," but Rowan was already ahead of her, expression darkening. "It's not Verena." A chill swept over Harper. She only knew one other woman with hair like that. Her breath faltered. My father's second wife, Elena. Rowan's eyes widened, the connection snapping into place. You mentioned she never liked you. That's an understatement, Harper whispered. She blamed me for my father leaving. She said I ruined his life, and now she thinks my babies can save his. Before Rowan could respond, the NICU intercom buzzed sharply. Dr. Hale, please report to the main entrance immediately. Rowan exchanged a tense look with Harper. Stay here. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. Harper nodded, clutching the incubator rail like an anchor. Rowan strode out of the NICU just as a guard rushed in, breathless. Ma'am, he said urgently, you need to come with me. Someone is demanding to see you. Harper's heart slammed against her ribs. Who? The guard swallowed. A woman with red hair, and she refuses to leave until she gets the babies. Harper followed the security guard down the long corridor, each step heavier than the last. Her palms were damp, her breath uneven. She had faced Cole. She had faced Verena. She had even faced the ghost of her father's betrayal. But the woman waiting for her now, Elena Sullivan, was a different kind of danger, a quiet, venomous danger, the kind that smiled while twisting knives into backs. When they reached the main entrance, Harper froze. Elena stood in the middle of the lobby like she owned the hospital. Her tall frame was wrapped in a burgundy cashmere coat, her red hair falling in elegant waves, her expression a cold mask of superiority. People moved out of her way without realizing why. Power radiated from her, but it wasn't real power. It was entitlement sharpened by bitterness. The moment Elena spotted Harper, her lips curved into a thin, poisonous smile. Well, she said, her voice smooth as glass, the prodigal daughter returns. Harper swallowed hard. What are you doing here, Elena? Elena took a step closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. I came for what should have been ours a long time ago. Harper stiffened. My children aren't yours. They aren't Dad's. They're mine. Elena's smile didn't falter. Patrick is dying. The words hit Harper like a punch to the chest. Elena continued. He needs a genetic match for a stem cell treatment, something only close blood relatives can provide. And you want to use my babies, Harper said, her voice raw. You want to take from them the way he took from me. Elena's eyes hardened. Your father gave your life. You owe him, she said. Owe him? I remember my voice was just shaking with anger. He left us, I told her. He left my mom to handle everything alone. He wasn't there when she was sick or when I had to quit school. He didn't even say goodbye. Elena just snapped at me to let the past go, that this was bigger than my feelings. But I was calm then. I told her no, it was exactly about my feelings, my kids, and that she would never touch them. That was the first time I saw her perfect mask slip. She hissed at me, asking if I really thought I could stop her, if I thought that doctor of mine could protect me. She bragged about her lawyers, her money, and then she looked me up and down and said, You have always been weak. But I didn't even blink. I told her, Weak people don't survive what I have. For just a second, she had no answer, and right then, Rowan showed up right behind me, and his presence felt like a warm, protective wall. He stood beside me without saying a thing, just staring at Elena with an anger I rarely saw in him. He told her, in this very even voice, that she would leave the hospital, that she would not come near me or my children ever again. Elena just laughed, this cold, awful sound, and asked who he thought he was. That's when Rowan pulled a document from his coat and gave it to security. It was a temporary protective order, starting immediately. Her smirk just vanished. She sputtered that he couldn't do that, and he just said, I already have. But she wasn't done. Not quite. Her eyes had this dangerous glint to them. "You think this ends here?" she whispered. "Harper will come to me. She'll have no choice." Before she could go on, Rowan stepped forward, his voice like ice, and said, "Get out." And security moved in. Elena gave me this look, honey, a look that promised so much trouble before she finally turned and stormed away. I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding. Rowan put a steady hand on my back and murmured that it was over, but as I watched those revolving doors, I knew something he didn't. Elena wasn't the type to walk away without a plan, and she never, ever struck just once. The very next morning, I found myself in this polished boardroom at Fairchild and Lawson, the law firm in Manhattan Rowan had found. I remember looking out the window at the winter sun bouncing off the skyscrapers, and inside, the tension was so thick. My lawyer, Mara Lawson, slid a pile of documents across the table to me. "Harper," she said, "what we're putting together isn't just about custody, it's a complete protection plan for you and your kids." I remember just nodding, my fingers tracing the edge of the paper. I asked about Elena, about my father. Mara told me they were filing restraining orders that day, plus a criminal complaint for what happened at the hospital. She tapped the file, saying a technician's confession would let the police trace everything back to them. My chest felt so tight. I'd spent so many years trying to keep that part of my life away, and now it was crashing right back in. Then Mara said there was also the issue of Cole. His lawyer had sent a letter that morning, trying to fight the DNA results and demanding to see the triplets. I remember how stiff I went. The man had abandoned us. He'd said they weren't his in a room full of people. Mara gave me this grim little smile. She said she was going to tear him to pieces with that. His signature on the parental refusal form was a legal disaster for him. With Verena's lies, his attempt to get into the NICU, and getting fired, he didn't have a leg to stand on. It was a relief, but a sad one, too. I had wanted Cole to love his children, not use them. But that's not how life works sometimes. Mara turned a page. "Now, about your father," she said, "there's something you need to see." She handed me a hospital report Rowan's contacts had pulled together overnight. I frowned, asking what it was. "It's about his medical condition," she said gently, "and something else." I read through the pages, and each line felt like a punch. Genetic marrow failure, progressive, prognosis poor. Then my eyes landed on the sentence that froze my blood. He was a potential candidate for an experimental treatment, but it required a family match. My hand started to tremble. So it was true. He was dying. "Yes," Mara said softly. "And he thinks getting to your children is his only chance." I closed my eyes, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I wasn't a monster, but saving the man who never saved me by sacrificing the children he never wanted. I couldn't do it. Not anymore. Mara leaned in. "Harper, we also found something else." "About Elena." I looked up, surprised. "What about her?" I asked. "She's not just his wife," Mara said. "She's his financial guardian. If he dies before treatment, she inherits everything." I just blinked. "Everything?" I asked. "Every last thing he owned, and if he lived, well, Mara's face told me everything. Elena would get nothing." It hit me all at once. Elena wasn't fighting for her husband. She was fighting for her inheritance. Right then, Rowan appeared in the doorway, a little out of breath. He said there was new information. That security had found another camera angle, her angle. My pulse started racing. I asked if it was about Elena. He shook his head. "No, about your father." Mara frowned, asking what it was. Rowan stepped inside and closed the door. "Patrick didn't come to the hospital by himself," he said. He had help. I could barely breathe. Whose help? Rowan paused for just a second before he answered. Cole's. And just like that, I knew two men who had abandoned me, had now come together to fight me. I felt the air just vanish from my lungs. Cole, the man I once thought I'd build a life with, was working with the father who'd left me behind. It sounded crazy, but deep down, it made a horrible kind of sense. They were two men who needed control, and they were both losing it. Rowan put some security photos on the table. He said they were from 2 hours before my father tried to get into the NICU. It was him, and it was Cole, handing him an envelope. I stared at that grainy picture. Cole looked furious, and my father just looked sick, but determined. That envelope between them felt like the perfect symbol of their betrayal. What's in the envelope? I whispered. Cash, Rowan told me, and instructions. My father was supposed to get DNA from one of the babies to help Cole's new custody claim. I could hardly breathe. He was using my babies as bargaining chips. My lawyer, Maura, nodded grimly. She said it explained Cole's latest court filing, where he was claiming I had somehow forced Rowan to fake the guardianship papers. He was trying to build a story that I was unstable and vindictive. I almost laughed. It was so absurd. After everything he'd done, he wanted to be the victim? Mara leaned back and said something I'll never forget. Desperate men rewrite stories to survive them. But Rowan wasn't having it. His eyes were burning with this fierce protectiveness. He's not getting near those kids, Rowan said. Not now, not ever. But we need to act first, in court and publicly. I sat up a little straighter then. What do you need me to do? I asked. Your truth, Mara said. Every single detail, every threat, every time he walked away. She said the court needed to see the pattern. And you know, for the first time, I didn't feel any shame about it. I felt strong. So I told them everything, my voice steady the whole time. The memories weren't chains anymore. They were evidence. Rowan stayed by my side through it all, just being this quiet, solid presence that grounded me. When I finished, Mara closed her notebook. Good, she said. We'll file against Cole within the hour and ask for emergency protections. With this, the judge will see it our way. I let out a shaky breath. It was relief, mixed with that fear you feel when a new storm is brewing. Then Rowan turned to me. There's more. My stomach clenched. I told him I didn't think I could handle any more. You can, he said so softly. You already have. He put another document down. It was an internal memo from the hospital. I asked him what I was looking at. A complaint, Rowan said, filed by Cole, against me. My heart just plummeted. He was accusing Rowan of improper conduct with a patient, with me. I shot right out of my chair. What? That's a lie. Rowan nodded. Of course it is, but if it sticks, I lose my license. He's trying to get me out of the way so you'll be alone. My fists were clenched so tight. I wasn't going to let him do that. I wouldn't let him take away the one person who was actually protecting us. I saw this flicker in Rowan's eyes, a rare look of vulnerability. We'll fight it, together, he said. Mara looked between us, then put a new file on the table. This is our counterstrike, she told us. And once we file it, Cole will have nowhere left to go. I remember nodding, just trying to hold myself together. But before Mara could say another word, her phone went off with this awful, sharp buzz. I saw her face go completely pale as she looked at the screen. I just whispered, "What is it?" And she looked up, her voice so tight with fear. The judge was calling an emergency hearing. Rowan went still beside me. When? He asked. Now, Mara said. as in 30 minutes from now. My heart just hammered in my chest. Everything about my children's future was about to be decided, and I knew Cole would be there. I can still smell the courthouse, that mix of old paper and cold air. Every nerve in my body was on fire. Rowan was on one side, Mara on the other, and we moved with this intensity that made people stare. My hands were clammy, but I kept my back straight. I told myself I wasn't there as a victim that day. I was there as a mother. Of course, Cole was already inside, sitting next to his lawyer, looking so sure of himself. That smug look was back on his face, like a stain you can't quite scrub out. He was dressed for the part in a navy suit and silver tie, slicked back hair. He looked like a man who thought he could win over a judge, just like he won over investors. But I saw his eyes flicker when I walked in. It wasn't guilt, I realized now. It was fear. He saw I wasn't the same person anymore. I didn't look at him. I just sat down next to Mara, with Rowan right behind me like a guardian. Then the judge came in, stern, with silver hair, and she silenced the whole room with just a look. This emergency hearing, she started, will address 3 things: temporary custody of the children, alleged misconduct by Dr. Rowan Hale, and safety concerns at the neonatal unit. My heart pounded. It felt like 3 different battles happening all at once. Cole's lawyer stood up first. "Your Honor," he said, "my client has been wrongly kept from his children. Miss Sullivan and Dr. Hale conspired against him." The lies just poured out of him about how we had planned it all to cut him out. I saw Rowan's jaw clench. The lawyer wasn't done either. "We also believe Dr. Hale had an inappropriate relationship with a vulnerable patient." That's when Mara shot up from her chair so fast it scraped the floor. "Objection. We have proof that Mr. Maddox created false stories to cover his own neglect and abandonment." She handed the judge a binder so thick it made even her raise an eyebrow. It was filled with everything: copies of the parental refusal Cole had signed, statements from hospital staff, even security video of him screaming in the NICU hall, and Verina's confession about the doctored medical records. The judge's face went blank as she leafed through it. "Mr. Maddox, is this your signature?" Cole hesitated. I was misled." "Just answer the question." "Yes," he mumbled. "And you left the hospital while your children were being born?" "I didn't think they were mine." "That is not an excuse for abandonment," she snapped. I felt Rowan's hand rest on my chair, so steady. I didn't look back, but feeling it there calmed the shaking in my own breath. Then Mara spoke again. "Your Honor, we also have proof that Mr. Maddox recently worked with Patrick Sullivan, a man who has a restraining order request against him, to try and illegally get DNA samples from the NICU. Their stunt nearly harmed one of the babies." You could hear everyone in the courtroom start whispering. Cole's face got beet red. "That's a lie!" Rowan just held up the security photos. "This was taken 3 hours before someone tried to breach the ward." Cole's lawyer tried to object, but the judge just put up her hand. "Sit down." Cole just fell back into his chair, furious. The judge looked right at him. "Based on all this, full temporary custody stays with Miss Sullivan. Mr. Maddox will have no visitation rights pending a full investigation." A wave of relief washed over me. So strong, it almost made me dizzy. But she wasn't done yet. "As for the allegations against Dr. Hale," she said, looking at Rowan, "this court finds no misconduct. In fact, his quick thinking probably saved Astrid Sullivan's life." I watched Rowan let out a slow breath, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. But then the judge got to the last page in Mara's binder, and her brow furrowed. This is concerning," she said quietly. I froze. "What is it?" The judge's eyes were sharp as glass. Miss Sullivan, did you know your father filed a petition right before this hearing? I felt my blood run cold. He's trying to get emergency guardianship. Rowan started to speak. Your Honor, that man? But the judge held up her hand. I haven't ruled on it, but the petition includes a sworn statement making accusations against Miss Sullivan. My pulse was hammering in my ears. Accusations? The judge shut the file. And the person who gave the testimony is someone you know. I could barely breathe. Mr. Maddox? The judge said. Please come forward. Cole got up so slowly, like he was being pulled by strings, and for the first time that day, he didn't look angry or smug. He looked truly shaken. I watched him walk to the stand, my heart pounding. I felt like the walls were closing in on me all over again. The judge put on her glasses. Mr. Maddox, you gave sworn testimony to support Patrick Sullivan's petition. Is that correct? Cole cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. I could feel Mara tense up beside me. And in that statement, the judge went on, you said Miss Sullivan was emotionally unstable, reckless, and unfit for making parental decisions. The words hit me like a slap, but I kept my face perfectly still. Cole quickly added, I was worried about the children, Your Honor. She wouldn't let me see them. Because you signed away your rights, the judge shot back. Cole stumbled over his words. I glanced at Rowan. He looked like he was about to launch himself over the table. Mara stood. Your Honor, we'd like to cross-examine. Go ahead, the judge nodded. Mara walked toward Cole, slow and deliberate. Mr. Maddox, you say my client is unstable. On what grounds? He hesitated. She fainted in labor. From blood loss, Mara cut in. From a high-risk pregnancy, not instability. Cole's jaw worked. She made bad choices. Like what? She waited until after her second scan to tell me she was having triplets. I had to close my eyes. It hurt to hear him twist it like that. I only waited because I was terrified he'd crush what little hope I had. Mara's voice became like steel. And yet, you told the paramedic she wasn't your wife, but some woman trying to trap you. Is that a lie? Cole's face went white. The whole room started whispering again. The judge leaned forward. Is this true? Cole stammered. I was misinformed. Verena told me things. Ah, yes, Mara said smoothly. Verena Lowe, who is being investigated for medical fraud. Cole just swallowed. And Patrick Sullivan, Mara continued, turning back to the judge, a man who abandoned his own child and used a stolen identity inside a hospital. This is who Mr. Maddox supports for guardianship? The judge's face was like stone. Mr. Maddox, do you have any idea how bad this makes you look? Suddenly, Cole's desperation boiled over into rage. I was manipulated, he yelled. She lied to me for years. She knew I couldn't have children. Rowan's voice cut through the noise, low and tight. That's not true. Your fertility was fine. The record was changed. The judge glared. Mr. Maddox, approach the bench. He stumbled up there. She lowered her voice, but you could feel the fury in the air. We heard bits and pieces of her just laying into him. You abandoned your wife. You tried to break into a secure unit. You conspired with a known criminal. You are trying to take a mother's newborn babies. Her voice grew sharp. You have zero credibility. I saw the panic finally crack through Cole's arrogance. The judge raised her voice so everyone could hear. I am ordering a criminal investigation into your actions and your connection to Patrick Sullivan. A gasp went through the courtroom. I felt like I could finally take a full breath. Cole just collapsed back into his seat, his hands shaking. The judge looked at her papers again. This petition from Patrick Sullivan is built on lies and forgeries. It is hereby, but before she could finish, the courtroom doors flew open. A bailiff rushed to her, whispering urgently. Her whole expression changed from confusion to alarm. She stood up. Miss Sullivan, Dr. Hale, you need to come with us, now. My heart seized in my chest. What's wrong? The judge looked right at me, her voice grave. It's the babies. I remember Rowan's hand grabbing my chair, grounding me for just a second. Then the judge said, they're missing from the NICU. I honestly don't remember getting from the courthouse to the hospital. It's all a blur. One second, I was looking at the judge's horrified face. The next, I was running down hospital hallways, my breath tearing out of my lungs. I was just moving on pure instinct, not even hearing Rowan calling my name behind me. My babies were gone. Just vanished from the NICU, the one place they were supposed to be safe. Alarms were screaming. Red lights were flashing everywhere. Staff were rushing around, their faces full of fear. All I could hear were panicked voices shouting, check all the exits, lock down the elevators, no one, out of here without being cleared. You know, my heart was just a drum against my ribs, about to burst. This can't be happening, I whispered. Not my babies? I remember Rowan coming right up beside me, his hands firm on my shoulders. Harper, he said, listen. They're alive. If someone wanted to hurt them, they wouldn't have just taken them. We'll find them. But I heard his voice tremble just a little, and that's what truly terrified me. A head nurse rushed over, her tablet shaking. We've checked the cameras, she stammered. The triplets were taken by someone in full scrubs, mask and all. Could you see a face? Rowan asked, his voice sharp. No, but we followed them down 3 halls before the feed went black. Black? I remember my voice cracking. What did you mean, black? Someone cut the power to them. Rowan swore, and I just pressed my hands to my head, trying to keep from falling apart. Who would do something like this? Cole was in court, Verena was locked up, and Elena had been escorted out. The nurse hesitated, then said, We found this inside one of the bassinets. She handed me a folded note. My blood ran cold when I opened it. If you want them back, come alone. That was it. No signature, just a raw threat. Rowan took the note, his jaw tight. This is a setup. You aren't going anywhere by yourself. Before I could even answer, we heard the security radios crackle. Suspects sighted, Northwest Wing, 2 infant carriers, heading for the staff loading dock. I gasped. That was the old wing. Nobody ever used it. Rowan cursed. It has private exits. We just ran, faster than I ever thought I could move after giving birth, our feet pounding down the hall, through a set of double doors and into this long, dim corridor. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered. It was so eerie. As we neared the end of the hall, a security guard came sprinting toward us. Dr. Hale, Ms. Sullivan, he panted. We found the 3rd carrier by a utility closet. It's empty, but it's okay. My knees nearly gave out. Empty? Where's my baby? I cried. The tracks lead outside, the guard said, to the loading dock alley. I didn't even wait. I just shoved past him and burst through the exit door into the freezing air. My breath plumed in front of me, and then I saw it, and I just froze solid. An engine roared to life down the alley, a black SUV with its back doors wide open, and inside I could see 2 of my baby's carriers. Rowan yelled for me to stay back, but I stumbled forward, just screaming, "My babies!" The headlights flashed, and someone inside turned, a silhouette, and my heart stopped. It was my father, Patrick Sullivan. He was still holding one of the carriers, and his eyes, oh, they were so hollow and desperate. But it was the person in the driver's seat that made Rowan swear out loud. It was Cole. He looked straight at me, his face a mess of panic and resolve. "Harper," he shouted over the engine. "We're taking them someplace safe. Safe from her." I lunged, but Rowan grabbed at my arm. The SUV peeled backward with a screech of tires. And then from the shadows behind the truck, another person stepped out and raised a weapon. For a split second, the whole world just held its breath. I was frozen. Rowan yanked me behind him, just as the gunshot cracked through the alley. The bullet hit the pavement, just inches from the back tire. I screamed. My father ducked inside the car. Cole slammed on the gas, but the shooter, you see, wasn't aiming for me or the babies. He was aiming for the tires. At that very moment, security burst out onto the loading dock, drawn by the sound of the shot. The SUV swerved wildly on its blown tires and crashed right into a metal railing. The doors flew open. My father stumbled out, clutching one carrier to his chest. Cole crawled out the driver's side, dazed, but trying to grab the other one. "Give me my children," I cried, running toward them with Rowan and security right behind me. But before we could get there, my father fell to his knees. It wasn't from fear, but just pure exhaustion. His breath was ragged, his face was gray. He held the carrier out with trembling hands. "Take him, Harper," he whispered. "Please." I stopped right in front of him. For the first time, the desperation in his eyes wasn't about him. It wasn't manipulative. It was just human. I took the carrier so gently. He just bowed his head. "I just wanted some time," he said. "I thought I could fix what I broke." I had to swallow this huge lump in my throat. "Hurting my children doesn't fix anything," I told him. He nodded, tears just streaming down his face. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry for everything." Security helped him up, and he didn't resist at all. His last words to me were a whisper, "You're stronger than I ever deserved." Cole, though, he tried to run, even holding one of his own children. Rowan tackled him before he got 2 steps. The baby carrier rolled safely right to my feet as security swarmed Cole. "You're done," Rowan growled. "It's over." Cole was thrashing and screaming that I'd poisoned his life, but nobody was listening. They finally saw him for what he was. He was arrested right there for kidnapping, conspiracy, and a dozen other things. I just stood there shaking, the cold biting at my skin, but my heart was finally steady as I held 2 of my babies. The third was brought out a moment later by a nurse who'd had the sense to run to safety with him when the alarm went off. All 3 of them were alive, safe, and breathing. I collapsed to my knees, sobbing, just broken open with relief. Rowan knelt beside me, his arms wrapped around me, and pressed his forehead to mine. "You did it," he whispered. "You protected them. You won." And I looked at him then. I mean, really looked at him, and I didn't see a doctor or a guardian. I just saw the man who had held me together every single time I was about to fall apart. Later that week, in a quiet courtroom, a judge gave me permanent, full custody. Cole's parental rights were terminated completely. My father voluntarily gave up any claim to the children and quietly went to face what he'd done. Elena was charged as an accomplice, and Verena got her sentence for medical fraud. Justice finally had a name. Months went by. Spring came to New York, and the city felt soft with sunlight. I remember pushing that huge triple stroller through Central Park, the wind on my cheeks. My babies were sleeping, all bundled up. Rowan walked right beside me, holding my hand, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "Harper," he said softly, stopping us near the cherry blossoms. "I don't want to replace what you lost. I just want to build what comes next." My heart just swelled. I stepped closer, my tears feeling warm in the cool air. "Rowan," I said, "I want that too." And under all those beautiful pink blossoms, our lips met. It wasn't as a rescuer and the rescued, but just as two people who had walked through hell to find one another. The past wasn't chasing me anymore. The future didn't scare me. My family, my real family, was all right here. And for the very first time in my life, I, Harper Sullivan, finally felt whole. So, that's our story, how it all came to be. And you know, if you're still listening to me ramble on, it means something in this long journey touched you in some way. Maybe it was a reminder of your own strength, or maybe it brought back storms that you yourself walked through, or fierce. Maybe it was just a little whisper that healing can happen, even after you feel shattered. And my dear friend, yes, I'm talking to you. Maybe you're fighting your own battles right now. Maybe you're at your own crossroads. Just remember, your story isn't over. You are always allowed to write a new chapter. Now, if you're still here, I want to talk to you, not about Harper, about you. Because this story isn't really about a cheating husband or a scheming mistress or a father who showed up 15 years too late. Those are just the characters. The real story is about something much more personal, something I think a lot of us carry but don't talk about. It's about the moment you realize you've been making yourself small for someone who never asked you to be big. Harper spent years shrinking. She wore secondhand sweaters while Cole climbed the corporate ladder. She swallowed his criticism and called it stress. She accepted his silence and called it distance. And when Verena walked into their lives with a smile that had no warmth behind it, Harper didn't see the danger because she had already stopped trusting her own instincts. And that's the first lesson. When you spend too long ignoring your gut, you stop hearing it altogether. Harper didn't miss the red flags because she was stupid. She missed them because she had trained herself to believe that keeping the peace was more important than keeping her dignity. And I think a lot of us do that. We stay quiet because we don't want to be difficult. We forgive too fast because we're afraid of being alone. We accept crumbs from people who once gave us the whole cake, and we tell ourselves, it's enough. It's not enough. It was never enough. The second lesson is about Verena, and it's one that might surprise you. Verena wasn't powerful. She was obsessed. There's a difference. She didn't build anything real. She tore down what someone else had built and stood in the rubble, pretending it was a throne. Every move she made, faking medical records, manipulating Cole, sneaking into the NICU, all of it came from the same broken place, the belief that she could only rise by making someone else fall. And if you've ever met a Verena in your own life, someone who smiles to your face while pulling the ground from under your feet, here's what I want you to remember. People who build their lives on the wreckage of yours will always run out of material. Always. Verena's entire plan depended on Harper staying weak. The moment Harper stood up, the whole thing crumbled. The third lesson is about Cole, and this one hurts the most. Because Cole wasn't a villain from the start. He was a man who chose comfort over character. He chose the easy lie over the hard truth. He chose Verena's flattery over Harper's honesty. And when the consequences came, he didn't take responsibility. He doubled down. He signed away his children. He conspired with a man who had abandoned his own daughter. He filed false complaints against the one doctor who saved his family. And that's the tragedy of Cole Maddox. He had everything. A wife who loved him, 3 miracle babies, a career most people dream of. And he threw it all away because his ego was hungrier than his heart. Let that be a warning. The moment you start believing your own lies, you become the last person to see the truth. But the most important lesson? It's about Harper's transformation. And it didn't happen in the courtroom. It didn't happen when the board voted Cole out. It didn't happen when the judge gave her full custody. It happened in a hospital room, the morning after she almost died, when a nurse brought her a mirror. Harper looked at her own reflection and saw not a victim, not a broken woman, but someone fiercely alive. And she made a choice. She chose to stop waiting for someone to rescue her. She chose to stop apologizing for existing. She chose to be the mother her children needed and the woman she had always been underneath all that fear. That mirror moment, that's available to every single one of us. You don't need a dramatic courtroom scene. You don't need a Rowan Hale to hand you an envelope. You just need one honest look at yourself and the courage to say, I deserve more than this. I am done shrinking. And yes, Rowan mattered. He mattered enormously. But notice what Harper said when he offered to fight her battles. She said, "No, this is something I have to do for myself." That's not stubbornness. That's wisdom. Because the people who truly love you don't rescue you from your life. They stand beside you while you rescue yourself. So if you're out there tonight, sitting in your own version of that hospital bed, feeling like the walls are closing in, feeling like the people who should love you are the ones tearing you apart, I want you to hear this clearly. Your story is not over. You are allowed to write a new chapter. You are allowed to stand up in the middle of the mess and say, "This ends now." You are allowed to be angry. You are allowed to grieve. And then you are allowed to rise. Because the strongest people I know aren't the ones who never got knocked down. They're the ones who got knocked down by the people they trusted most and still found the courage to get back up. Harper Sullivan walked into that boardroom in a dark green dress with fire in her eyes, and she didn't win because the evidence was on her side. She won because she finally believed she was worth fighting for. And so are you. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. If even one line of this made you feel something, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me, but so you'll be here for the next story. Because every single one of them is built for people like you. People who are strong enough to feel, brave enough to listen, and wise enough to learn from someone else's storm before their own hits. Leave a comment below. Tell me which moment gave you chills. Tell me what you would have said to Cole. Tell me about your own Harper moment. I read every single one. And share this with someone who's going through it right now. Sometimes the thing that saves us isn't advice, it's just knowing we're not alone. I'll see you in the next one. This content was researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories and life lessons. All characters and events are fictional and created for educational and entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons or situations is entirely coincidental. Our goal is to inspire reflection, emotional strength, and personal growth through the power of storytelling. If this story touched your heart, please support our work by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your engagement helps us continue creating content that matters